I want to tell you about Joel. Not the kind of prophet people quote without thinking, but the man, the witness of devastation, the one who stood in the middle of it all when the world began to come apart. Joel lived in a time when nothing felt secure anymore. The seasons still came, but they no longer brought life. The sun still rose, but it didn't carry hope. One morning, the horizon shifted. It didn't roar or tremble. It simply dimmed, the kind of darkness that doesn't explain itself, the kind that wraps around you before you know what it means. Joel was already listening before the skies turned. That's something I've come to respect about him. He wasn't loud. He didn't try to be important. He just paid attention to things others overlooked, the mood of the land, the cracks in the joy of the people, the silence where worship used to live. So when the swarm came, Joel didn't flinch. He watched. Thousands of wings, waves of motion blacking out the sky. The locusts didn't argue, they didn't threaten, they came to devour. Every crop, every vine, every piece of tomorrow that had been growing, gone. Not just food, it was memory, it was dignity, it was everything people thought they could count on. Joel walked among the ruined fields. He saw the bare soil and the hollow eyes. He saw the empty winepress and knew this wasn't just about the harvest. Something deeper had dried up. And that's where he heard it, a voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, unshaken by panic. Return to me with all your heart. That's what the voice said. No sermon, no conditions, just a return. Joel didn't invent this. He didn't dramatize it. He heard it. And I believe him, because only someone who has stood in ashes can recognize a call that soft. He didn't tell the people to stage ritual. He didn't hand out instructions. Instead, Joel said something that stayed with me for years. Tear your heart, not your garments. Do you hear the weight in that? Joel saw what everyone else missed. They were ready to mourn publicly, ashes, torn clothes, rehearsed words. But Joel called them inward, because God wasn't asking for theater. He was waiting for truth. And somehow Joel knew that the voice wasn't angry. It was aching. He called God gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, overflowing with kindness. And maybe, just maybe, still willing to turn this whole judgment into a moment of mercy. That's what amazes me about Joel. He stood in the center of a broken nation, a people who had lost everything, including their way back, and he still believed in return. He spoke to those who had nothing left, no crops, no offerings, no answers. And he said, even now, that's how he began. I think about that often. I think about the courage it takes to believe in even now. Joel didn't wait for things to improve. He spoke while the sky was still dark, while the ground was still bare. Because Joel understood something I've come to hold close. Sometimes God speaks most clearly through the silence that follows disaster. And when he speaks, it's never to shame. It's always to call.
Joel never exaggerated. When he said the fields were ruined, he wasn't reaching for poetry. He had walked them. He had stood ankle-deep in soil that had once fed families and now offered nothing but dust. He had seen vines that used to hold clusters of promise, brittle, stripped, silent. But Joel didn't just see land, he saw hearts. That's something I love about him. Joel wasn't the kind of man who mistook symptoms for causes. He looked past what was visible and spoke into what was hidden. And when he described the desolation, it wasn't only the harvest he was mourning. He was mourning worship. He said joy had vanished from the winepress. He said the grain offering and drink offering had been cut off, not because people forgot the rituals, but because they had lost the reason behind them. The altar was still there, but something in the spirit of the people had gone quiet, and Joel felt it deeply. I imagine him waking early, not to perform, but to grieve, watching the priests move mechanically through sacred motions that once burned with fire, listening to songs sung from memory, but no longer from the soul. There's something haunting about a land that looks fine from a distance, but reveals its hunger when you get close. Joel knew that hunger. He had tasted it in the prayers that no longer reached heaven, in the gatherings that had no weight, in the offerings that came more from habit than from hope. He never blamed the people. That's important to understand. Joel didn't speak with disgust. He spoke with ache, as if he too had once gone through the motions and now finally felt the absence that had become normal. He called the elders. He called the priests. He even called the children, not to scold them, but to awaken them, to tell them the truth. Something has withered inside us, and it's time to feel that loss. And Joel wept. He wept for the animals that had no pasture. He wept for the seed shriveling under clods of hardened earth. He wept for the people who didn't yet realize what they were missing. Because that's the thing about spiritual drought. You often don't know you're thirsty until someone shows you what water tastes like. Joel wasn't interested in complaining. He was searching for life, even in the ruin, especially in the ruin. And he believed that if the people could recognize the dryness, they might begin to seek rain, not from the sky, but from God. He didn't offer them a plan. He offered them awareness. He named what was empty so they could finally hunger for what was full. The fields are destroyed. The ground mourns, not to create despair, but to show where the healing must begin. I read his words now, and I feel like he's speaking straight into this moment, not as a prophet from long ago, but as a friend who's seen beneath the surface, a friend who can look at a life that seems fine on the outside and gently ask, "Do you feel it too? That quiet ache, that silence where worship used to live?" Joel never offered easy answers, but he knew how to name the wound. And sometimes, that's where the mercy starts.
Joel said something that never left me. Tear your heart, not your garments. It's the kind of sentence you read once and it stays with you, not because it's clever, but because it knows something about you that you hadn't put into words yet. In Joel's world, people knew how to look repentant. They knew the ceremonies, ashes, torn robes, public weeping. They even knew how to sound desperate without ever truly letting go of control. But Joel had seen too much to be impressed by any of it. He watched people go through motions while their hearts remained guarded. He heard prayers that filled the air, but not the soul. He saw tears that came too easily to trust. And so he raised his voice, not in anger, but in urgency. Because Joel knew what God was actually asking for. Not performance, not panic, not one more show of sadness to earn sympathy from heaven. Joel spoke of a wound, not the kind people could see, but the kind God could feel. A heart torn open, not from punishment, but from longing. A break, not for shame's sake, but to make space for grace. When Joel said, "Return to me with all your heart," he didn't mean to come crawling, afraid of wrath. He meant to come honest, unarmed, with nothing left to defend. Not because God needed it, but because the heart does. That's the strange mercy in Joel's voice. He doesn't try to scare people into coming back. He invites them, like someone who has stood in that place himself, like someone who knows what it feels like to run out of strength, out of excuses, out of words, and still be met with kindness. He called God slow to anger, abundant in steadfast love, ready to turn, even now, after all the neglect, even now, after the drought of worship, even now, after joy dried up and people forgot how to pray with fire. Joel believed in a God who waits at the edge of ruin, not to accuse, but to restore. And the tearing of the heart, that wasn't the price of return, it was the first breath of it. The moment a soul finally admits how far it's wandered and how much it misses the voice that once felt near. I've thought a lot about that kind of return. Not the kind you announce, not the kind that earns applause, the kind that happens quietly, in the place no one else sees, where the words don't always come, where the tears surprise you, where you stop explaining and just let yourself be known. That's what Joel was pointing to. Not religion, not ritual, just love. Honest love. Because when a heart tears open, not from despair, but from desire, something sacred enters, and nothing is ever quite the same after that.
Joel didn't just speak of return. He spoke of something that would come after. Not just healing, not just restoration, something deeper. Something that would breathe into the dry places and do what no ritual ever could. Joel said, "I will pour out my spirit on all flesh." That's how he put it. No limits, no exceptions, not for the strong or the special, for all. And I believe those were the words that surprised people the most, because until then, the Spirit was something distant, something that visited prophets, hovered near kings, touched only the ones set apart. Everyone else watched from the outside. They prayed, they hoped, but they never really expected the Spirit to find them. But Joel said otherwise. He said sons and daughters would speak visions, elders would dream again, young men would burn with something they couldn't explain. Even the servants, those forgotten by the world, would carry the same presence that once rested on Moses and David. Joel wasn't offering a metaphor. He wasn't casting a poetic hope. He was revealing a promise from the mouth of God. And in that promise was a new way of belonging, not earned, not inherited, not for sale, just given.
Because God's Spirit doesn't look at titles, it looks for hearts that are open. I imagine Joel standing there, saying those words out loud, maybe even unsure of how far they would reach, but believing, fully believing, that when God says all flesh, He means it. He means the ones with doubt still clinging to them. He means the ones who think they've disqualified themselves. He means the tired, the poor, the young who've lost their way, the old who thought their time had passed. He means you. And Joel never flinched when he said it, because he knew what grace could do. He had seen dry ground crack open. He had heard silence split with the sound of mercy. And if the Spirit could come for him, if it could speak into his voice and his tears, then surely it could come for anyone. Even now, even here, even you. Joel saw a day coming, not just a season, not just a moment of revival or relief, a day that would reach every nation, every heart, every hidden thing. He called it the day of the Lord. And when he spoke of it, you could feel the weight in his voice. Joel didn't describe it with drama. He described it with clarity. He said the nations would be gathered, not by force, but by truth. They would be brought into a valley, not of punishment, but of decision. The valley of Jehoshaphat, the place where all pretending would finally end. I used to wonder why Joel called it that, a valley. You'd think a judgment would happen on a mountain, above everything. But Joel placed it low, in the folds of the earth, a place where shadows stretch long, a place where you can't run in any direction without facing yourself. That's where the day of the Lord comes. Not like a bolt of fear from the sky, but as a stillness that settles beneath your ribs and asks the question you've always avoided. What remains between you and God when everything else is stripped away? Joel wasn't trying to scare people. He was trying to awaken them. Because this day wasn't just about wrath, it was about revelation. The moment when the light finally touches the places we've hidden, the words we didn't say, the mercy we rejected, the pride we defended. And yet, even in that valley, Joel saw something more.
He saw the Lord's voice roaring from Zion, not as destruction, but as truth that cannot be ignored. The heavens trembling, the earth shaking, and still a shelter, a refuge, not for the proud, not for the performative, but for those who stand in the valley and say, I have no defense, only need. That's what made Joel's vision different. He didn't paint a God waiting to condemn. He revealed a God ready to be found. Right there, in the valley, in the reckoning, in the silence after every excuse falls apart. I think that's what we fear the most. Not the fire, not the thunder, but the honesty. Because we know how much we've built to keep ourselves safe from it. We know the layers, the justifications, the borrowed faith, the smile that covers the ache.
But Joel spoke of a day when those layers would peel back, and what would remain would not be our performance, but our proximity to truth, to holiness, to a God who sees everything and still says, "Come." And maybe that's why Joel's words still echo, because deep down we know that valley is coming for each of us. Maybe not in the same hour, maybe not in front of a crowd, but in the quiet of the soul, when God leans in and asks, "Are you ready to be known?" Not judged for what you should have been, but received for who you are, if only you'll turn. That's the valley Joe walked into with his words, and somehow, even in that place of deep truth, he saw light.
Joel never finished with judgment. Even as he stood in the ruins, even as he spoke of valleys and reckonings, his voice carried something else. Not escape, not denial, but hope. A quiet kind, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that waits, soft as breath, just beyond despair. Joel said, "Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Not just the righteous, not just the strong, not just the ones who never wondered. Everyone." I don't know how many people heard those words when Joel first spoke them. Maybe they were too crushed by loss to believe them. Maybe they thought it sounded too simple. But Joel meant every syllable, because he had seen what mercy looks like after devastation. He had seen what God does when there's nothing left to offer but the name itself. No gifts, no power, just a voice. Just a heart cracking open enough to say, "Lord, if you hear me, come." There's something sacred about that kind of cry. It's not rehearsed, it's not elegant. It doesn't come from strength. It comes from the place underneath all strength, where the only thing left is longing. And Joel believed that's the place God listens most closely. He believed that even if the locusts have taken everything, even if the sky never brightened, even if every plan and structure failed, the name of the Lord would still be enough to rebuild a soul. Not to restore what was before, but to create something deeper, truer, something not grown in comfort, but in surrender. That's why Joel could whisper hope, not because he ignored the darkness, but because he knew it doesn't get the final word. And if all that's left is breath, and if that breath can still speak the name of the Lord, then salvation is already closer than we think.
If something stirred while you listened, don't rush past it. Let it linger. Let it speak. Maybe this wasn't just Joel's story. Maybe it's yours too. Maybe the sky dimmed in your own way. Maybe the fields around you have fallen silent. Maybe your heart knows the ache Joel described. And maybe now something in you is ready to return. Not perfectly, not with all the answers, just honestly. Because the same voice that called Joel is still calling. And if you can still whisper his name, then grace is already near. So if this reached something deep in you, pass it on, not for views, not for numbers, but because someone else is standing in the dark, waiting for a voice they can trust. And if that's you, may the Lord restore what was lost. May He breathe gently into your soul, and may His Spirit find you, even now.